This is, perhaps, the most misunderstood character in all of Elden Ring, and also the one I find the most profoundly tragic. It is not Marika, the imprisoned God Queen, nor Radagon, the loyal hound of the Golden Order, although I do love analyzing them. No. This one figure, Malenia, Blade of Miquella, standing at the root of the rotting halig tree, represents, to me, the absolute pinnacle of From Software's tragic design. But not for the reasons you think. I am not here to tell you the sad story of a noble warrior cursed by an outer god. We have all heard that tale. I am here to argue that Malenia is not a hero. She is not a tragic knight. She is a tragic zealot. I would argue that everything we admire about her, her unbreakable loyalty, her indomitable will, her singular devotion to a single purpose, are the very tragic flaws that doomed a continent. Her loyalty was not a virtue, it was a weapon. Now I know that is a bold claim. Blasphemy, some will say. Malenia is one of the most beloved, most simped-for characters in the entire community. She is the ultimate souls-born waifu. But I believe that to frame her as a simple hero is to fundamentally misunderstand the core message of Elden Ring. We are going to look at Caelid, not as a tragic battle, but as a war crime. We will look at her title, Blade of Miquella, not as an oath of honor, but as an ideological shackle that stripped her of her own humanity. This is not the story of a woman fighting her curse. This is the story of a woman who weaponized her curse, a woman willing to sacrifice the entire world for one single person. And that, I think, is infinitely more terrifying. As an aside, if you do not have time to watch this entire analysis, I recommend you skip to part 4, the final section. If there is any one takeaway I want you to have from this, you will find everything culminating there. So, if we are to understand how the game's most beloved character might also be its most tragic villain, we need to start by understanding what her devotion truly is, because I think it is a great deal more than just a knight's loyalty. We need to talk about Caelid. So Caelid. This is the heart of the matter. This is the linchpin of the entire argument against Malenia's supposed heroism. For years, the community has debated why she was even there, and the prevailing theories are all sympathetic to her. Now some will say she was marching on Caelid to reach Mohgwyn Palace, which lies directly beneath it. That she was on a desperate rescue mission to save her twin brother, Miquella, from the clutches of Mohg. This is a noble, understandable motive. Others will argue, perhaps more compellingly, that she was there to kill Radahn specifically. Radahn, in his grief, had held back the stars, and this gravitational stasis was preventing the eclipse Miquella needed at Castle Sol to advance his own plans. Again, a tactical, understandable motive in service of her demigod brother. And I will concede both of these points. Her motives were likely pure, at least from her perspective. She was acting in service of the only person she ever loved, the only person she ever defined herself by, Miquella. But motives do not absolve actions. And it is Malenia's actions at the climax of that battle that redefine her character from a noble warrior into something far more terrifying. The battle with Radahn was, by all accounts, a stalemate. Two of the most powerful demigods, locked in a conflict that neither could win. Radahn, the master of gravity and a brilliant general, Malenia, the undefeated swordswoman. They were a perfect match, and Malenia could not accept that. She who had never known defeat was faced with it. She was faced with an opponent she could not simply outskill, so she made a choice. She did not retreat. She did not accept a draw. She did not try to find another way. Instead, she chose to unleash a weapon of mass destruction upon the entire continent. She unhooked her prosthetic arm, rose into the air, and for the first time, truly became the goddess of rot. She bloomed, the Scarlet Aeonia. This was not a defensive maneuver. This was an act of profound, world-ending spite. This was a biological nuke. The game is not subtle about this. The result was the total annihilation of Caelid. It was transformed into a festering scarlet wasteland of plague and decay. Radon himself was not killed. He was lobotomized, driven insane by the rot, left to wander his own ruined battlefield as a mindless beast. The entire ecosystem collapsed. The very air became poison. And I think this is the detail that so many people are willing to overlook, simply because they like her character design. This was not an accident. It was not a side effect. It was a choice. Malenia's devotion to Miquella was so absolute, her identity as undefeated so core to her being, that she was willing to sacrifice millions of innocent lives and destroy an entire landmass just to not lose a single fight. That is not the action of a hero. That is not the choice of a noble warrior. That is the cold calculus of a zealot. It is the act of someone who believes their personal goal is so righteous, so paramount, that any collateral damage is acceptable. And the tragedy is, it was all for nothing. The bloom that destroyed Caelid also put her into a coma. She didn't even win. She was carried away by one of her loyal, clean-wrought knights, while the world she had just murdered burned around her. This singular act of hubris cost everyone everything, and it didn't even achieve her goal. When we, the player, finally meet her, she is not a prisoner. She is not a victim waiting to be saved. She is a queen sitting on a throne at the heart of her own diseased kingdom, waiting for a challenger. She is a monument to her own destructive pride. This brings us to the core of her identity, or rather, her lack of one. Think about how she introduces herself to us. In that quiet, terrifyingly calm voice, she does not say, "I am Malenia the Empyrean," or "I am Malenia the Undefeated." She says, "I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella." This is not a boast. It is not just a title. It is, I would argue, her entire psychological profile summed up in 5 words. It is a mission statement. It is a limitation. It is a confession. Compare her to her siblings. Radon is Star Scourge, a title he earned through his own legendary actions. Rykard is the Lord of Blasphemy, a title he chose in his rebellion. Rani is the Lunar Princess, a title reflecting her own destiny. These demigods have identities, ambitions, and philosophies that are their own. Malenia has a function. I would argue that Malenia is, in many ways, an empty vessel. She is a person who, burdened by a divine curse, found meaning and purpose not within herself, but by dedicating her entire existence to someone else. Her brother, Miquella, is her god, her king, and her entire moral compass. Now, some will say this loyalty is beautiful, a pure, incorruptible devotion. In a world of selfish, backstabbing demigods, here is one person who is truly selfless, devoted only to her twin. But I think it is something far more tragic and dangerous. It is a total abdication of self, a hollowing out of her own agency. A hero must have an internal moral compass. They must be able to weigh right from wrong and make a choice. Malenia, I believe, has no such compass. Her compass is Miquella. If Miquella deemed an action necessary, she would execute it, regardless of its moral implications. This is the only way to make sense of her campaign. Look at her march to Caelid. We know she fought other demigods along the way. She famously defeated Godric the Grafted, but she did not kill him. She just left. Why? Not out of mercy. You don't unleash the scarlet rot on a continent out of a sense of mercy. She let him live because he was irrelevant. He was not a threat to Miquella. He was a pathetic roadblock, and once he was swatted aside, she had no more use for him. She didn't spare him. She dismissed him. A hero would have judged Godric for his atrocities, for the grafting, for the suffering he inflicted. A hero would have felt something. Malenia felt nothing, because her actions are not guided by a sense of justice or good. They are guided by a simple, terrifying flowchart. Does this help Miquella? This is what makes her so effective. She is the perfect sword. She is sharp, precise, and feels no remorse. But a sword is not a hero. A sword is a tool. It is a weapon. And it is this very emptiness, this devotion, that allowed her to rationalize the single greatest atrocity in the history of the lands between. The mission, in her mind, superseded any and all personal or moral objections to genocide. Her identity as the Blade of Miquella required the death of Caelid. So her identity is built on two pillars. The first, as we discussed, is Miquella. The second is her unbroken record. I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and I have never known defeat. This line is critical. I don't think this is a simple boast. I don't think it's just pride, though there is immense pride in it. I think this is a compulsion. It is a psychological necessity. This belief, this core tenet of her being, is not just a source of pride. It is a law of nature that she enforces upon the world. She cannot be defeated, because if she is, her entire sense of self, her entire value as a blade, shatters. If she is not Miquella's undefeated sword, then what is she? Just a cursed woman, rotting from the inside out. Her identity is a fortress built to keep that horrifying reality at bay. And this, I would argue, is the real key to understanding Caelid. Radon presented her with a philosophical crisis. He presented a paradox. He was an opponent who could not be beaten, not by her, not with skill alone. She was the finest sword in the world, but he was a master of gravity who could simply push her away. He commanded an entire army. She had only her honor guard. He was a force of nature. She was a master of technique, and technique was not enough. In that moment, she was faced with a choice. She could accept the stalemate. She could accept that there was one warrior equal to her and retreat to find another way. This would have been the honorable choice. This would have been the heroic choice. It would have saved a continent, but it would have required her to accept defeat. And she was psychologically incapable of doing so. To accept defeat would be to break the second pillar of her identity. It would be a form of suicide. So, she had to choose which part of her identity to sacrifice. Was she Malenia the Undefeated, or was she a person with a conscience? Was she a weapon, or was she a woman? She chose to be the weapon. I think this is the moment where Malenia stops being a person and becomes a thing. She becomes an event. She becomes an atrocity. She sacrificed her humanity and the humanity of everyone in Caelid, all to preserve the idea of herself. She chose to destroy the world rather than destroy her own self-image. And that is the core of zealotry. It is the elevation of an idea, an abstract concept like victory or loyalty or faith, above the tangible, breathing reality of human life. When she bloomed over Caelid, it was not a last resort. It was an assertion of her own reality. The world was wrong for presenting her with a foe she could not beat. So she broke the world to make it right. This is why, when we meet her, she is not repenting. She shows no remorse. She simply waits. Because in her mind, she did what was necessary. She upheld the tenets of her faith. She remained undefeated. The cost, to her, was irrelevant. Now we have to address the giant scarlet elephant in the room, the rot itself. The most common defense of Malenia, the one I see on Reddit and in comments every single day, is that she is not responsible for her actions, that she is a tragic victim, a vessel for a malevolent outer god, the god of rot. And this is, of course, partially true. She is a victim. She was born cursed. She has spent her entire life in a symbiotic, agonizing battle with this divine infection. I am not debating that. Her suffering is, without question, immense. But here is where my interpretation diverges. I would argue that her tragedy is not that she is a mindless puppet of the rot. Her tragedy is that she chooses to stop resisting it. She chooses to weaponize it. Think about the central conflict of her entire existence. Her brother, Miquella, created the unalloyed gold. We see this in his needle, which he used to ward off the meddling of outer gods. The entire purpose of the Halig tree, the entire purpose of Miquella's unalloyed gold, was to resist the rot's influence, to hold it in stasis, and to finally cure his sister. Malenia's entire life was defined by this resistance. This is her nobility. This is the part of her that is heroic. She is the woman holding back a literal apocalypse inside her own body through sheer, indomitable will, until she decides not to. Look at the description of the Scarlet Aeonia incantation. It says, "Each time the scarlet flower blooms, Malenia edges closer to the godhood of rot, and more importantly, the flower blooms to create a new god." Notice the language. It does not say the rot overcomes her or the rot forces her to bloom. It says the flower blooms to create. This is a process. This is a transformation. It is an ascension. When Malenia nuked Kylid, it was not an accidental sneeze. It was not a seizure. She was not overcome by the rot in a moment of weakness. She was faced with an unbeatable foe, and she made a deal with the devil inside her. She chose to stop resisting. She chose to edge closer to godhood in exchange for victory. She pulled the trigger on the gun she had been holding back her entire life. This is what makes her so much more complex. If she were just a puppet, she would be blameless. But she is not. She is a person who was given a choice. Maintain your honor, your resistance, and your humanity, or win. And she chose to win. This reframes her entire ideology. Her clean rot knights worship the rot. They see it as a holy thing. Where did they get that idea? They got it from her. She is not just the rot's prisoner. She is its goddess, its prophet, its willing executioner. This is the ultimate corruption. Her curse was not just physical, it was ideological. The rot did not just offer her death, it offered her power. The power to remain undefeated, the power to protect Miquella, and she accepted the bargain. She is not a victim of the rot. She is its willing collaborator. She is the tragic hero who gave up the fight, not against Radon, but against her own inner demon, all for the sake of pride. For years, Malenia's blind devotion was seen as tragically beautiful. She was the immovable object, the loyal shield, waiting for her brother's return. But now, with the revelations from the Land of Shadow, this devotion is cast in a new, even more heartbreaking light. Our understanding of Miquella has changed. The Miquella we see in the shadow of the Erd tree is not just a kind savior. He is a pragmatist. He is a god in the making. And the process of becoming a god is, as Marika and Radagon demonstrated, a process of profound sacrifice. Lore from the DLC suggests that Miquella's ascension required him to abandon his past. Item descriptions and dialogue imply he had to shed his flesh, his blood, his love, his everything, to achieve his new form. Now let us stop and truly consider the horrifying implication of that. While Malenia was in the Halig tree, rotting away, defining her entire existence by her brother's name, her brother was in another realm, actively abandoning the very love that defined her. I would argue that this is the ultimate, cruelest twist in Malenia's story. She is the blade of Miquella, but Miquella is no longer Miquella, brother of Malenia. He has moved on. He has a new, grander purpose, a new age to create, a new godhood to ascend to. Her loyalty is not just blind, it is one-sided. She is a relic. She is a tool from a previous plan, a sword left behind in an old armory, still sharp, still ready, but for a master who will never come back for it. This, to me, shatters the hero narrative completely. A hero's sacrifice must have meaning. Malenia's entire life is a sacrifice for a cause that has already forgotten her. This recasts her fight with us, the player, in an entirely different light. When we walk through that fog gate, we are not just a challenger. We are a threat to the one thing she has left, her faith. We are the living, breathing proof that the world has moved on, that her vigil is meaningless. She doesn't fight us to protect the Halig tree. She doesn't fight us to protect Miquella, who is realms away. She fights us to protect her idea of Miquella. She fights us to protect her own purpose. This is why she is so desperate. This is why she blooms a final third time, a bloom so powerful it should kill her, just to defeat us. It is the last desperate act of a zealot whose God has gone silent. She is not just fighting for her life. She is fighting for her sanity. She is fighting to prove that her entire life of suffering was not in vain. She is not a hero guarding a sacred place. She is a tragic, terrifying figure, clinging to a dead faith, willing to kill anyone and everyone who threatens to show her the truth, that she is, and perhaps always has been, completely and utterly alone. A hero is often judged by the people they inspire. So let us look at the people who follow Malenia. First, you have the clean-wrought knights. They are not a simple honor guard. They are a religious order. Their armor speaks of a pure devotion, yet they willingly serve the goddess of rot. They are fanatics, a cult of personality and plague, who see divinity in her disease. They don't just follow a general, they worship a god. This is the first clue. A hero inspires virtue. Malenia inspires zealous, diseased devotion. But the most damning piece of evidence against Malenia is not an enemy. It is a friend. It is Millicent. The questline of Millicent is, I would argue, the single most important story for understanding Malenia. It is not a side quest. It is the moral thesis of this entire conflict. Millicent is Malenia's mirror. She is, as Gowry implies, a daughter or scion of Malenia, born from the rot. She is a perfect parallel, a proud, red-haired swordswoman, afflicted by the very same curse, on a quest to find her purpose. And for the entire game, we watch Millicent struggle with the exact same choices Malenia faced. Gowry, her father, pushes her down Malenia's path. He wants her to bloom. He wants her to flower into a scarlet Valkyrie. He is grooming her to become the next goddess of rot. He is, in effect, trying to make her fail as Malenia failed. And then we reach the end. At the Halig Tree, Millicent is given the final choice. She can betray us, accept the rot, and ascend, or she can resist. In her final defining moment, Millicent makes the choice that Malenia never could. She rejects the path to godhood. She chooses to die as herself. She removes the unalloyed gold needle, the very thing staving off the rot's influence. And in doing so, she accepts defeat. She accepts her own mortality. She chooses her humanity over power. Her final words to us are, "I want to die as myself. This is it. This is the entire point." Millicent's story is a direct, intentional, and devastating critique of Malenia. It presents the exact same set of circumstances and shows us what a true hero does. A hero chooses agency over power. A hero chooses to die as a person rather than live as a monster. A hero, when faced with an unbeatable foe, accepts the loss to protect their own soul. Millicent passed the test. Malenia failed it. When Malenia was faced with Radon, an unbeatable foe, she was given the same choice: accept defeat or bloom. She chose to bloom. She chose power. She chose to become the goddess of rot. She failed the test. When she faces us, another unbeatable foe, she is given the same choice again. And what does she do? She blooms, not once, but twice. She sacrifices the last remnants of her humanity, her resistance, just for the chance to defeat us. She fails the test again. Millicent is the hero of this story. Malenia is the cautionary tale. She is the tragic figure who was so obsessed with being an undefeated sword that she forgot to be a person. She is the proof that true strength is not about never knowing defeat. It is about knowing exactly who you are, even when you lose. Let's talk about the idea of a hero. A hero's actions should, at some level, be defensible. Their virtues should be virtues we can and should emulate. So let us look at the virtues Malenia emulates. We've already established that her undefeated status is a psychological compulsion, and her loyalty is a blind, amoral zealotry. And this, to me, is where the hero narrative completely collapses. Because Malenia's flaws are not just her own, they are infectious. She doesn't just inspire loyalty, she inspires fanaticism. Look at her clean rot knights. As I mentioned, they are a cult. They aren't just loyal soldiers, they are disciples of a faith. They have been so indoctrinated by Malenia's own ideology that they too have come to see the rot not as a curse, but as a sacred thing. They are a mirror of her own twisted rationalization. A true hero, a true leader, would inspire their followers to fight against the curse, to find their own strength, to hold on to their humanity. This is what Millicent does. Malenia, by contrast, inspires her followers to submit to the curse. She teaches them that power, victory, and loyalty are all that matter. She teaches them that the rot is a source of strength, a divine gift. She has created an entire military order that has adopted her own worst flaw: the willingness to embrace a destructive force in the name of a higher purpose. This is the poison of her ideology. It's not just her, it's what she creates. Now, some will say this is just the loyalty of a dedicated army, but I would argue it's something far more sinister. It is a cult of personality. Her followers do not see her as a person. They see her as an idea. She is the Valkyrie. She is strength. She is undefeated. They worship the symbol of Malenia, not the woman. And in doing so, they are blinded to her reality. This is why the Halig Tree is so tragic. It is a kingdom built by a cult for a cult, in service of a dead god. It is a bubble of pure, unadulterated zealotry. Inside this bubble, Malenia is a hero. She is a goddess. Her actions are righteous. Her power is divine. But the moment you step outside that bubble, what is she? Ask the survivors of Caelid if Malenia is a hero. Ask the maddened, rotting soldiers of Radon. Ask the earth itself, torn apart and poisoned for eternity. A true hero's virtues are universal. A true hero's actions are, at their core, about preservation and justice. Malenia's heroism is a localized phenomenon. It is a faith that can only exist by ignoring the screams of the millions she sacrificed. Her heroism is a lie. It is a story her followers tell themselves so they don't have to confront the monster they serve. And she is their chief ideologue, the one who taught them that the monster was, in fact, a god. Millicent was the only one who saw the truth. She was the only one who had the strength to reject the cult. She was the one true hero of the Haligtree, because she was the only one brave enough to choose her own death over joining their faith. And so, we arrive at that fog gate, at the deepest root of the dying Haligtree. When we, the player, step into that chapel, we are not just a random tarnished. We are, I would argue, the final test of her entire ideology. We are the ultimate walking paradox that her zealotry cannot compute. Think about it from her perspective. We are not from the Haligtree. We are not Cleanrot Knights. We are not Albinorics. We are an outsider. By her logic, we are a threat. A hero, a queen, a person might have spoken. They might have asked, "Who are you? Why are you here?" They might have tried to understand our motives, but Malenia is not a person. She is a blade, and a blade has only one function. She doesn't see a person with complex motives. She sees a threat to Miquella's sanctuary, and her one singular programmed response is to destroy. Her opening lines are not a parley. They are a death sentence. I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and I have never known defeat. This is the tragedy in real time. She is not fighting us. She is fighting to preserve the two pillars of her identity, her loyalty to Miquella and her undefeated status. We are simply the anvil upon which she will break herself. The fight begins, and she is, without question, the most skilled warrior we have ever faced. The waterfowl dance is not just a flurry of attacks. It is the pinnacle of a lifetime of training. This is her human self. This is the warrior, the swordswoman, the general. And when we defeat her, when we, a simple tarnished, do the impossible and bring the undefeated warrior to her knees, the test begins again. This is the Caelid choice, all over again. She is faced with defeat. She is faced with the ultimate paradox, a foe she cannot beat. And what does she do? Does she accept her loss with honor? Does she, like Millicent, choose to die as herself? No. She chooses what she chose at Caelid. She chooses to bloom. Her second phase, her transformation into the goddess of rot, is not a hidden power. It is a relapse. It is her failing. It is the final, desperate act of a zealot sacrificing the very last of her humanity just for the chance to win. Her line, "You will witness true horror," is not a threat. I think it is a lament. It is a moment of horrifying clarity. She knows what she is about to do. She knows she is about to unleash the god she has spent her entire life resisting. But her compulsion to win, her programming as the undefeated blade, is stronger than her own will to live. She would rather become a monster than accept a loss. She fails the test. She becomes the Scarlet Aeonia. And she fights us again, no longer as a warrior, but as a plague. Our boss fight is not a glorious duel against a noble hero. It is a mercy killing. We are putting down a tragic figure who is so trapped by her own ideology that she has chosen to become an apocalypse, rather than admit she is not the sword her brother needed her to be. We are not just killing a demigod. We are shattering a false idol. To be fair to Malenia, we cannot just judge her actions in a vacuum. We have to understand the almost unimaginable pressure she was born under. Malenia was not just a demigod, she was an Empyrean. This is a title that, in the lands between, is less of a privilege and more of a curse. To be an Empyrean means you have been chosen. You are a candidate to succeed Marika, to become the vessel for the next age, the next god. It is a destiny imposed upon you, and with that destiny comes a horrifying vulnerability. Empyreans are, by their very nature, targets. They are magnets for the influence of outer gods, who are all vying to install their own god, their own age, in the lands between. Rani was chosen by the Two Fingers, but was haunted by the Dark Moon. The Gloam-eyed Queen, another Empyrean, became the vessel for the god of death. And Malenia, along with her twin Miquella, was cursed from birth. Miquella was cursed with eternal youth, and Malenia was chosen by the nameless outer god of rot. Now I want you to truly sit with what that means. From the moment of her birth, Malenia has had a literal god whispering in her ear, infecting her blood, rotting her from the inside out. Her entire life has not just been a struggle to survive. It has been a constant, moment-to-moment psychic and spiritual war to maintain her own sanity and self against a divine parasite that wants to use her body to birth itself into the world. This context is crucial. It explains, though it does not excuse, her psychology. Her devotion to Miquella becomes more than just sisterly love. Miquella was not just her brother. He was her only defense. He was the one who created unalloyed gold, the only thing in existence that could ward off the meddling of outer gods. He was her shield. He was the one who gave her the needle that allowed her to keep her sanity. Her entire identity as Blade of Miquella is, in this light, a desperate survival tactic. He is the anchor holding her to reality. And her obsession with being undefeated? It also takes on a new, darker meaning. A single loss, a single moment of weakness, a single crack in her indomitable will might be all the god of rot needs to take over completely. Her pride is not just pride. It is a psychological dam holding back an ocean of divine madness. This is the pressure she lives under, every single day. But here is the turn. Here is the tragedy. This very defense mechanism becomes her undoing. The loyalty that was meant to save her becomes the ideology that damns her. The pride that was meant to protect her becomes the hubris that destroys Khalid. She is a figure who was given an impossible burden, and in her attempt to carry it, she became a monster. She was so terrified of being controlled by the god of rot that she became a different kind of monster, a zealot, all on her own. This is the central irony. In her desperate, fanatical quest to resist becoming the goddess of rot, she willingly used the goddess of rot's power to win. She became the very thing she was fighting, not because she was weak, but because she was too strong. Her will was so strong, her devotion so absolute, that she could not, would not, ever accept a loss. She was a tragic figure. But her tragedy was not her curse. Her tragedy was her choice. She was the one who decided that victory in the name of Miquella was more important than her own soul. And that is a choice no hero would ever make. Now is a good time to talk about the idea of her honor, This is, alongside her victimhood, the other main pillar of her defense. Many people point to the intro cutscene of her fight with Radahan. We see her arrive on the battlefield, her clean-wrought knights at her side. She puts on her helmet, a gesture of respect for a fellow warrior, and says, "I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella." This is framed as a Kurosawa-style moment of honor. Two grand masters saluting each other before a fated duel. And this is a powerful image. It's meant to be. But I would argue that this honor is conditional. It is a performance. It is an honor that only exists when she is winning. The moment the duel turned against her, the moment she was faced with a stalemate, that honor evaporated. Because a truly honorable warrior, a true hero, understands that honor is defined not by how you win, but by how you lose. An honorable warrior, upon realizing they are outmatched, accepts it. They yield, or they die. They do not, under any circumstances, detonate a nuclear bomb that poisons an entire continent, kills everyone but their opponent, and drives their opponent insane. This is not an honorable act. It is the act of a petulant child flipping the table over because they are about to lose the game. Now some will say, but she had to. It was for Miquella. It was a desperate situation. And this is the core of the zealot's mindset. This is the argument that the ends justify the means. But a hero, by definition, is someone who believes that the means are what matter. A hero believes that how you win is just as important, if not more important, than winning itself. Malenia, in this moment, proves she believes the opposite. She believes that winning, for Miquella, for her pride, is the only thing that matters. The means are irrelevant. If she must become a monster, she will. If she must sacrifice the world, she will. This is why her entire persona is a contradiction. She wears the mask of a noble, honorable knight, but beneath it is the cold, hard calculus of a fanatic. Let's look at her honor in our own fight. She demands we put our foolish ambitions to rest. She frames us as the aggressors, the ones without honor. And yet, when we best her, when we prove our skill is equal to or greater than hers, she doesn't congratulate us. She doesn't accept her defeat. She blooms. She resorts to the very power that is the antithesis of honor. She uses the rot, a power that is not her own, a power that requires no skill, just a complete surrender of self to try and get a cheap victory. This is a recurring pattern. This is her true character. She is an honorable warrior right up until the second she is about to lose. And in that second, she reveals that her pride and her mission are infinitely more important to her than any code of conduct. Her honor is a luxury, not a law, and she abandons it the moment it becomes inconvenient. A hero's honor is their law. That is the difference. So if Malenia is not a hero, what does that make us, the player? When we stand in that chapel, what role are we really playing? I would argue that we are not just a challenger. We are not just a tarnished seeking to become Elden Lord. In that moment, we are a mirror. We are the physical manifestation of her own inner conflict. Look at what we represent. We, the player, are the living embodiment of will. We are the tarnished, a person with no destiny, no curse, no divine mandate, who has clawed their way to the root of the Halig tree through sheer, indomitable persistence. We are, in many ways, what Malenia thinks she is. We are undefeated, not because we have never lost, but because we have never stopped trying. We have died and died and died again, and we keep getting back up. We are the personification of a will that is earned, not just declared. And then there is the rot. We, the player, are likely infected with her rot. We have traipsed through Caelid. We have fought her clean rot nights. We have waded through the lake of rot. We are, by all accounts, impure. And this is where it gets fascinating. When Malenia confronts us, she is, on a symbolic level, confronting herself. She is confronting a warrior whose will rivals her own, and she is confronting the very rot that she has tried to both resist and control. Our fight is not just a physical duel, it is a philosophical argument. Malenia is fighting for the idea of divine will, the will of Miquella, the destiny of the Haligtree, the godhood of rot. Her entire identity is built on these grand, abstract, divine concepts. We, the player, are fighting for human will, the simple, stubborn, mortal desire to see what is next, the desire to overcome a challenge, the desire to forge our own destiny, free of gods and masters. This is the real conflict. It is the divine versus the human. Zealotry versus persistence. When we defeat her first phase, we are proving that mortal human will is strong enough to best her perfect technique. We prove that her identity as undefeated is a lie. And when she blooms, when she becomes the goddess of rot, the fight changes. It is no longer a duel of skill, it is an argument of ideology. She is, in essence, screaming at us, "If my skill is not enough, will this divine power convince you? Will this apocalypse make you yield?" She is trying to prove that her god, her curse, is stronger than our simple humanity. And when we defeat that, when we, a simple, impure, tarnished, stand over the fading flower of a dead goddess, we are not just winning a boss fight. We are making a statement. We are proving that will is stronger than destiny. We are proving that humanity is stronger than godhood. We are proving that a hero is not someone who never loses, but someone who, like Millicent, chooses to die as themselves rather than become a monster to win. We are the mirror that, in her final moments, forces her to see the truth she spent her whole life running from. We are the hero in that room, not because we are good, but because we are free, and she, for all her power, was never anything but a slave. So why? Why would From Software build a character who seems so heroic, only to systematically and subtly tear her down? Why is Millicent's quiet, human death framed as a victory, while Malenia's divine, godlike power is framed as a failure? Because Malenia is not an exception. She is, I would argue, the rule. She is the perfect, tragic microcosm of the entire world's sickness. She is the ultimate symbol of what is wrong with the lands between. Think about it. What is the central conflict of Elden Ring? It is not a story of good versus evil. It is a story of competing zealotries. It is a world choking to death on absolute, unbending ideologies. The Golden Order is not evil, but it is a rigid, fundamentalist faith that, in its pursuit of perfection, cast out, imprisoned, or mutilated everything it deemed impure. The Omen, the Misbegotten, the Albinaurics, its zealotry broke the world. The Frenzied Flame is not evil, but it is an ideology of absolute, all-consuming love that seeks to melt down all life, all suffering, all individuality into a single, screaming mass. It is a zealotry of chaos. Rani's Age of Stars is not evil, but it is a cold, detached ideology that seeks to replace one divine order with another, trading a visible god for an unseen, distant one. Mog's dynasty, Rykard's blasphemy, Radahn's conquest. Every single major power in this world is a form of fundamentalism. Each one is a truth so absolute that it cannot coexist with any other. And Malenia is the most personal, most potent, and most tragic example of this. Her faith is not in an outer god or a golden order. Her faith is in a person, Miquella, and an idea being undefeated. And she pursues this faith with the same unbending, world-destroying certainty as Marika. Miquella himself was trying to create a new order, a better one, a purer one, an unalloyed one. But in doing so, they just repeated the same sin. They created an ideal so perfect that it had no room for compromise, no room for failure, no room for the messy, imperfect reality of the world. And when Malenia, the perfect sword of this new, perfect order, was confronted with an imperfect reality, a warrior she could not defeat, she could not bend, she could not compromise, she could not adapt. So she broke reality. She broke Caelid. Her story is From Software's ultimate critique of fundamentalism. It is a warning. It is a story that shows us that any ideology, no matter how noble its intentions, even one as beautiful as the halig tree, a sanctuary for the outcast, becomes a monster when it is placed above the value of life itself. Malenia is not a hero. She is the tragic, beautiful, rotting face of ideology. She is the proof that the true sin, the true rot at the heart of the lands between, is not chaos or evil. It is certainty. So let's pause for a moment. Let's step back from the individual pieces and look at the mosaic we have assembled. The popular mainstream narrative, the hero narrative, paints Malenia as a noble victim, a valiant warrior, cursed by an outer god, who fought honorably to defend her brother and his dream, only to be met by a tragic stalemate that forced her hand. But I've spent the last hour arguing that this narrative is not just an oversimplification. I think it is an active misreading of the evidence. I've argued that her core identity, Blade of Miquella, is not a title of honor, but a function, an abdication of self that allowed her to act without a moral compass. I've argued that her undefeated status was not just pride, but a psychological compulsion, a law of nature she was willing to enforce upon the world, even at the cost of destroying it. I've argued that Caelid was not a tragedy. It was a choice. It was a war crime. It was the moment her honor proved to be a lie, a luxury she abandoned the second it became inconvenient. I've argued that her relationship with the rot was not one of pure victimhood, but of collaboration. She did not just resist the rot, she weaponized it. She made a deal with the monster inside her in exchange for victory, not once, but 3 times. I've argued that the halig tree was not a functioning sanctuary she was protecting, but a failed dream, a rotting monument to a dead faith, which she guarded not as a queen, but as a mindless zealot. I've argued with the heartbreaking context of the DLC that her devotion was likely one-sided, a tragic, fanatical loyalty to a brother who had, in his own quest for godhood, already abandoned her. And I have argued that Millicent's story is the moral key, a direct, intentional critique by From Software, showing us what a true hero, one who chooses humanity over power, one who chooses to die as herself, actually looks like. So if Malenia is not a hero, what is she? She is the most brilliant, tragic, and terrifying character in the entire game. She is not a hero because she is something so much more complex. She is a warning. She is the ultimate catastrophic consequence of blind, unthinking, absolute faith. She is the beautiful, rotting flower that proves that ideology, no matter how pure its intentions, will always become a monster when it is placed above the value of a single human life. Now, with all of that on the table, we have to ask the final, most important question. What does this all mean? What is the final takeaway? So what is the final takeaway? What is the one truth that connects Malenia and Millicent and Caelid and the Haligtree? I think it is this. Elden Ring is a story about the cost of godhood, and Malenia is the story's most tragic receipt. Think about the central theme. The entire game is a philosophical exploration of what it means to be a god, and more importantly, what one must lose to become one. Marika had to shatter her own heart, her own counterpart, Radagon. She had to become a fractured, broken prisoner to enact her will. Miquella, as we have learned from the Land of Shadow, had to shed his blood, his flesh, and even his love to ascend. He had to abandon the very sister who defined herself by him. Ranni had to cast aside her Empyrean flesh, murdering her own body and her 2 fingers to become a god of the stars. In the world of Elden Ring, divinity is not an addition, it is a subtraction. It is a hollowing out of the self. To become a god is to become a thing, a being of singular, absolute, unbending purpose. And Malenia's entire story is this tragedy, played in reverse and in fast forward. She was born a person, a woman, a sister, who was cursed with the potential for godhood, the rot. Her entire life was a struggle against this divine potential. Her resistance to the rot was her resistance to this hollowing of the self. It was her fight to remain Malenia. And she won. For decades, she won. Through sheer will, she kept the god at bay. The tragedy is that her other zealotry, her fanatical devotion to Miquella, and her undefeated pride, is what ultimately tricked her into surrendering. She would never have surrendered to the rot god to save herself, but she would surrender to it to save Miquella's plan. She would surrender to it to win. This is the divine paradox at her core. Her loyalty, the very human trait we admire, is the crack that the divine used to get in. When she bloomed at Caelid, she was not just unleashing a weapon. She was surrendering her humanity. She was accepting the subtraction. She was agreeing to become a thing, a god, in exchange for power. And that is why Millicent is the key. Millicent, her daughter, her reflection, was offered the exact same bargain. "Betray your friend," Gori whispered, "and you will bloom into a Valkyrie. You will become divine." And Millicent, in that one glorious human moment of defiance, chose to die as herself. She chose humanity over divinity. She chose the addition of self-worth over the subtraction of godhood. Malenia is the one who failed. She is the tragedy. She is the story of a woman who fought a god her entire life, only to willingly become one, all for the sake of a pride and a purpose that, in the end, had already forgotten her. She is not a hero. She is a warning. She is the proof that in the lands between, the only way to truly win is to have the strength to lose. And so we return to where we began, to that quiet room at the bottom of a dying world, to the final scarlet bloom. When we, the player, finally fell the goddess of rot, she does not curse us. She does not scream in rage. She simply apologizes. "Oh, Miquella, dearest Miquella, I am sorry. I have finally met my match." This, I think, is the most heartbreaking line in the entire game, and it is the final, definitive proof of her tragedy. Even in her own death, she is not her. She is not Malenia. She is the blade of Miquella. Her final thought is not of her own life, her own pain, or her own death. Her final thought is of her failure to win, her failure to uphold her function. She is apologizing to Miquella for losing. After everything. After Caelid. After weaponizing the rot. After sacrificing her humanity. After transforming into a literal god of plague. Her only regret in the very end is that it still was not enough. She still, finally, knew defeat. She lived as a zealot, and she died as a zealot. And I think this is where the popular narrative gets her so wrong. To call Malenia a hero is, in a way, to cheapen her story. It strips her of her agency. It strips her of her flaws. It strips her of the very choices that make her so compelling. She is not a hero. She is a tragedy, and a tragedy is so much more powerful, so much more human. A hero is a simple, two-dimensional idea of good. A tragedy is a complex, heartbreaking story about a person, a good person, who is destroyed by a single catastrophic flaw. And Malenia's flaw was her love. Her love was so absolute, so pure, and so certain that it became a destructive force of nature. Her devotion was so profound that it left no room for morality, no room for compromise, no room for the rest of the world. She is a story about the danger of certainty. She is a warning that love, when it becomes blind, is no different from fanaticism, and that any faith, any ideology, even one as pure as a sister's love, becomes a monster when it demands you sacrifice the world to prove it. To me, that is a far better and far sadder story than just calling her a hero. She is the most human character in the entire game, because she is a monument to the most human of all failings. To love something so much that you are willing to destroy everything, including yourself, to protect it. This, to me, is one of the most subtle and most damning pieces of evidence. We need to talk about unalloyed gold. What is unalloyed gold? We know it as the substance Miquella created. The description of Malenia's needle tells us it was crafted to ward off the meddling of outer gods. It is, in essence, an insulator against divine influence. It is the physical manifestation of resistance. Miquella's entire philosophy was built on this. The Haligtree was his attempt to create a new order, and unalloyed gold was his method. It was a symbol of pure, unadulterated will, free from the influence of the greater will, the frenzied flame, or most importantly, the god of rot. Malenia carries this cure. The needle is in her. She is the vessel of Miquella's entire philosophy, and yet she fundamentally misunderstands it. Miquella's philosophy was one of pure resistance, of holding back the outer gods, of creating a sanctuary free from their influence. Malenia, as we have established, is a pragmatist, a zealot. She is not interested in pure resistance. She is interested in winning. This is the central conflict between her and her brother's ideals. Miquella gave her a shield, the needle, to resist the rot. But when she was faced with a foe she could not beat, Radan, she chose to throw the shield away and use the rot as a sword. This is a profound betrayal of Miquella's entire life's work. He dedicated his existence to finding a way to stop the outer gods. And his own blade, his own sister, in a moment of pride and desperation, chose to become the avatar for one of those gods, all for the sake of a single battle. This is why her fight with us is so tragic. When she blooms into the goddess of rot, she is not just attacking us. She is, on a symbolic level, spitting on her brother's cure. She is proving that his philosophy of pure resistance is weaker than her own simple, brutal desire to not lose. And let's look at Millicent again. What is her entire quest? It is to find Malenia, to return the unalloyed gold needle. It is a quest to restore the cure, to restore resistance, And what happens at the end? Millicent uses the needle to reject godhood. She uses it to die as herself. She proves that she understands Miquella's philosophy better than Malenia ever did. Millicent understands that the gold is not a weapon. It is a choice. It is the choice of self, the choice of humanity, over the meddling of outer gods. Malenia, for all her talk of loyalty, never understood this. She saw the needle as a tool to keep her functional, but she never once embraced its philosophy. Her story is a rejection of her brother's cure. She proves, in the end, that she has more faith in the power of the wrought god than she does in the philosophy of her own twin brother. She is loyal to the man, Miquella, but she is a heretic to his faith. And that, to me, makes her "I am Malenia, blade of Miquella" ring so incredibly hollow. She is his blade, yes, but she is a blade he never intended to be swung in that way. She is a tool that fundamentally misused its own purpose. There is one last, deeply unsettling layer to Malenia that we have not yet discussed: her role as a mother. This is a theme that From Software has woven through her character, from her physical design to her followers. We have the sisters and daughters of Millicent. We have Gowri, who speaks of birthing a new god. And we have the very nature of her bloom, which is a grotesque parody of birth, scattering rot and life across the land. Malenia is, in a very literal sense, the mother of rot. A hero, in the archetypal sense, is often a protector of the innocent, a parental figure to the weak. This is the image the Haligtree tries to project: a sanctuary for the children, spurned by the Golden Order. But Malenia's motherhood is a corruption of this ideal. It is, like everything else about her, a twisted mirror of what it should be. Her children, the kindred of rot, are not nurtured. They are spawned. They are the pests we see infesting Caelid, mindless, scuttling creatures of plague. They are the accidental, horrifying byproducts of her divine power. And then there is Millicent, her purest daughter. Malenia's only instinct upon meeting Millicent, if we were to summon her, would be to kill her. She is not a mother who sees her child. She is a system that sees a threat. This, I would argue, is the final nail in the hero coffin. Her divine power, her godhood, is not one of creation, but of infection. It is a sterile, cancerous life that does not nurture, but only replaces. It cannot create anything new. It can only corrupt what already exists. This is the most profound horror of her character. She is the embodiment of a failed motherhood. She is the ultimate matriarch of a dead-end faith. Think about the contrast with Marika. Marika's children, for all their flaws, were individuals. They had agency. They had wills of their own. They rebelled. They built. They fought. Malenia's children are either mindless slaves, the kindred of rot, or loyal, fanatical copies, the clean rot knights. Her family is a cult, a mirror of her own singular, unbending will. She is not a mother who creates life. She is a zealot who replicates herself. And this is, perhaps, what Miquella truly understood. Why was he trying to create unalloyed gold? Why was he so obsessed with resisting the outer gods? Because he, unlike his sister, understood the danger of this divine corruption. He saw what the outer gods did. The god of rot did not want a child. It wanted a vessel. It wanted to replace Malenia, to use her body as a womb to birth itself into the world. Malenia's entire struggle was a fight to not become this corrupted mother. And at Caelid, she let it happen. In our boss fight, she chooses it. The goddess of rot is her final, failed form. It is the ultimate expression of her giving up her humanity, her agency, and her own self, all to become a hollow, divine womb for a plague. She is not a hero. She is not a noble mother. She is a woman who, in her desperation to win, allowed herself to become the very thing her brother was trying to save her from. She is a womb that births only death. And so we return, back to that quiet chapel at the root of a dead tree. Back to the woman who said, "I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella." When I first started this journey, I, like many of you, saw her as a hero, a noble, tragic figure, a victim of a terrible curse. And after all this, after 90 minutes of analysis, after picking apart her history, her choices, and her very soul, I must confess, she is not a hero. She is something so much more. To call Malenia a hero is, in the end, an insult. It is a simplification. It is to file her down, to blunt her edges, to make her safe and understandable. It is to ignore her agency, her rage, her pride, and her catastrophic, world-breaking flaws. It is to ignore the humanity that makes her so terrifying. No, Malenia is not a hero. She is a tragedy. And a tragedy is not the story of a good person who bad things happen to. A tragedy is the story of a good person who, because of a single, unbending flaw, chooses to bring about their own destruction and the destruction of everyone around them. That is Malenia. Her flaw was not the rot. The rot was just a curse. Her flaw was her certainty, her absolute, unbending, incorruptible faith. A faith in her brother Miquella. A faith in her own undefeated blade. A faith so strong it gave her the power to resist a god, but so blind it prevented her from seeing the monster she was becoming. In the end, Malenia had two gods inside her, the god of rot and the god she had made of her brother, and she spent her life fighting one, only to be completely and utterly consumed by the other. This is the final, agonizing truth. This is what Millicent understood in her final moments. When Millicent chose to die, she said, "I want to die as myself." She was not just rejecting the rot, she was rejecting Malenia's path. She was rejecting the idea of zealotry. She was rejecting the idea that any cause, any god, any person is worth sacrificing your own soul for. Millicent died as Millicent. Malenia died as the Blade of Miquella. She lived as a tool. She died as a tool. Her final words, an apology to her master for having finally met her match, are the proof. Her only regret was that she broke. She is the most brilliant, most terrifying, and most complete character From Software has ever created. She is a warning about the danger of absolute love, a warning about the poison of blind faith. She is the proof that the most destructive force in the universe is not hate, and it is not a plague. It is a good intention, a noble cause that has become so certain of its own righteousness that it can no longer see the millions of bodies it is standing on. She is not a hero. She is the beautiful, rotting flower at the end of ideology. She is the human heart, mummified in unalloyed gold, loyal to a god who had already left her behind. She is the story of a woman who was given the strength to save the world, but instead chose to destroy it, all for the love of a brother who, in the end, did not love her back enough. Thank you for watching.